Welcome to Talking Absolute Worship. I'm thrilled to be joined by two of our best preachers from the Talking Absolute Worship stable, Rachel and Anne, who've come to share their wisdom on these Epiphany passages. The year feels like it's getting old already as we tiptoe into the second Sunday after Epiphany. And some interesting passages to look at. Rachel, kick us off. Where are you thinking of going in your preaching with these passages?
Well, after my initial, what on earth am I going to pick from these readings, I did come up with an idea because I went back to the Isaiah 49 passage, and there were a couple of verses, actually just one verse, verse 2. He made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand, he hid me. He made me a polished arrow. In his quiver, he hid me away. So I thought my theme for the day would be that we are God's secret weapons.
Secret weapons.
So I was thinking about we've got the context of Isaiah being the exile. The people have got no sense of a future, really. No options seem to be open to them. Everything seems pretty hopeless. And then along comes Isaiah, and he speaks about a servant who is sent by God and empowered by God, and emphasizes that the mission, the secret mission, if you like, is God's big idea. Actually, it's a not so secret mission to bring back the exiles because God is a gathering God who wants to bring people back. So then the servant admits to being very weak and thinking that he won't be able to fulfill this mission. But then suddenly, right in the middle of it all, he receives the strength. He doesn't get the strength before he starts the mission, but when he needs it, he finds that the strength from God is there. And then God has more in mind. So this mission to gather back the exiles, actually, that's not even the half of it, because God's got bigger plans for the servant, international plans for the whole world, plans even for non-believers. Who would have thought it? And one day there's going to be this amazing role reversal so that those who are rejected and dishonoured will be acknowledged. They've already got a special favour with God, but one day even kings and princes will appreciate them too. And I thought that the psalm kind of echoed Isaiah and emphasises that God hears and saves and transforms. So it really affirms the liberating love of God. But I think it goes beyond that, because it's also, the psalmist is also not just saying, oh, God is great, blah, 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 but also making a pledge, and this is the psalmist's commitment to follow and to proclaim what God has done. So I was thinking that this would be a Sunday when we could affirm all the big things about God, and we could, all the big general things, we could acknowledge and we could name all the things that God has done in our lives so far. We could think about the times when we've felt completely weak and useless, and suddenly at just the right moment we've somehow found this strength or the right words to say or whatever. But more than that, we're not just going back over what has been, but we're pledging and committing ourselves to follow and to act, and perhaps most importantly, to change the world. And we might we're the secret weapons that God has, that God uses to change and to liberate and to transform. I'm sure God could just, zap in there and do it, but actually God chooses to use God's secret weapons, which is people just like us. And we might want to leave it all to someone else, or we might want to leave it all to God, or we might think we're not strong enough or important enough or clever enough, but actually we're exactly the right people, exactly the people that God chooses to work with. and that's in the big things and in the small things. We're the ones through whom God's love and grace is unleashed in a really powerful way into the world. So I'm sticking with Isaiah and with the Psalm and thinking about us being God's secret weapons, and what might that mean for us today?
Right, you're completely ignoring the gospel.
Yes.
I remind you, John Wesley is stood behind you, frowning upon you.
Yeah, I've noticed he's looking in the other direction. Away. Yes, I'm turning away from this. Yes.
I'm sure I would still have the gospel reading in the service, and I might even find a way to bring it in. But I think sometimes you can't necessarily get something out of every reading that all goes into one sermon and makes sense.
Have one thing to say and say it well. And also the way the lectionary falls, the congregation will have had a whole Sunday about John the Baptist and Jesus being baptized last week.
Yes, indeed.
I think, what is he on about? Didn't you realize they did this last week?
I was heard to say just a few days ago, the lectionary does not serve as well in the few weeks after Christmas, because it sort of messes us around, and I don't think it works always. So yeah. I think there's loads in that Isaiah. I think it's really I thought it was really exciting reading to go for. I've put in my notes here, I've just put, in the midst of exile, where everything seems impossible, God chooses and to use, and I just think it's really interesting. So shall I talk about the gospel a bit?
It's not just a secret mission, it's a mission impossible.
It's a mission out there. It is.
Right.
Impossible. I should have gone with that.
Well, no, you've got the word mission in there. And I don't know, I like that, Rachel. I like having that, something a hook to hang it on, and this whole mission idea is cool. So now I'm starting to think of other things you can do in the service. We might even talk about in part 2 then. Maybe you've got all those ideas already, dressing up as James Bond and all that kind of stuff. So that's cool. Nicely done. Anne's going to steer us towards the gospel, though. So
okay, I'll take us to the gospel.
Turn around, John Wesley. Everything is okay.
Well, in the weeks after, in sort of the weeks of Epiphany, I always like to kind of carry on the sort of the Epiphany, the Christmas Epiphany theme, of what is being revealed. So I always try and ask myself what's being revealed in the readings in the weeks after Epiphany. And one of the things that actually struck me from all of the readings for this Epiphany too, is that there's something about witnessing, and that what God has revealed, that needs then to be revealed to others. And so that was the kind of line that I'm looking at with the gospel and the baptism of Jesus. I think it's an interesting telling of the baptism of Jesus, because it's John telling the impact on him, rather than actually, because the other gospels, they tell us this is what it did for Jesus, but actually in John it's this, this is the impact it had on John. And the fact, that John says twice, I didn't know him, but I came to know him because of what happened. So he's kind of being witnessed to by Jesus, and then because of what he has discovered, he can then open that possibility up to others as well. So this sort of, as I said before, this sort of, what God has revealed to us, we need to then reveal to others. I think this is a wonderful story of stuff being passed on, and then of course it carries on when the disciples are called, and then they start passing it on as well. Come and see what we have found out. So there's this whole, for me, throughout all the readings, actually, there's something about witnessing. So Isaiah, there's a whole thing about that he's kind of witnessing to the people what God has called him to do. The Psalm actually talks about I am a witness to what God has done. And then if you and then obviously I've just said about John, but then of course in Corinthians there's also this idea of Paul witnessing to people as well, and carrying the story on of what he has seen, he gives to others. So I'm torn at the moment between the gospel and also I'm very drawn to the both of the Old Testament, but also there's the Corinthians stuff as well, and actually digging into that letter as well. So, but I'll leave it, just we won't go to Corinthians just yet. We'll pull back, and because I'm very torn at the moment as to what I'm going to settle on. So that's where I'm kind of thinking about with John, is this idea of passing the witness, passing on what we've discovered. Yeah,
Rachel.
Yeah, and one of the things that struck me about the John reading is that kind of once you're passing it on, it's really beyond your control.
Yes.
Because it's suddenly on this reading of it, and it's a passage, that we've all probably read a lot of times. When I was reading it last night, it just suddenly occurred to me that you've got John and his disciples, and suddenly this thing is passed on, this thing that John didn't know, but then he does know and he passes it on. Suddenly his disciples up and leave him. Yes. And go off and follow Jesus.
Yes.
And I just thought, yeah, unintended consequences.
Yes.
I just thought, I just love the way it's completely gone beyond John's control. Yes. And all these, the people that he maybe thought were going to be sticking with him, they're off and following Jesus. And maybe that's something that we need to think about a little bit in church, because we can get a bit upset if people, want to go and join another church.
Yes.
And leave our church. But actually, I'm trying to say to people, actually, sometimes, God is calling people to leave us, and well, that's sad for us. We've got to sort of wish them well and bless them. If this is what God is calling them to do. So that sense of just being a little bit out of control, quite like.
No, I think that's really significant thing to reflect on, is that when we get involved with God, things get out of our control. I
found myself on Sunday talking to a new couple who wandered into Sawston Free Church on Sunday morning, and when you're kind of aware of a young couple who wandered in, and you're sort of keeping your eye on them through the service, thinking, how are they reacting to this? Are they comfortable? And they were sort of smiling away and nodding and whatever, and they looked very comfortable and very happy. I chatted to them afterwards, and through gritted teeth, I heard myself saying, you've just moved in, you've just arrived, they've only been here a week. So through gritted teeth, I heard myself saying, there's 4 churches in Sawston. So I kind of look, maybe they're on this is the one. Yep. Should look no further. There's nothing more to see. This whole conversation in John's Gospel is about, as you point out, moving on from John and coming to see something else. It's like a weird little conversation. It's like that game where you have to answer every question with a question. What are you looking for? Says Jesus. Where are you staying? And then Jesus loses because he doesn't answer with another question. He just says, come and see. And I had a quick look at that, as I have a vague memory of a conversation on Talking Absolute Worship ages ago, and we must have been talking about the vine and the branches. And you're talking about the phrase abide, the word abide with me, and what it means. When Jesus says abide with me, stay stuck to the vine, or whatever, stay attached. And this is one of the few places where it appears. Where are you staying is the same word. I think it's meno. Where are you abiding? Where are you? And it's not just what's your address. So tell us where you're living. The commentators I read seem to suggest it's something they're asking something deeper. It's really, if you're going to translate it into not the actual words but the sense of it, it's how can we stick with this? How can we be part of this on an ongoing basis? How can we stay close to you? Where are you going to be? How can we always find you? It's not just like show us where your house is and we'll come and have a look. because I mean, probably didn't have a house, did he? He's staying in somebody else's house. So I don't know if he's got a key, but whether he can let people in or not, I don't know how all that works. But that word abide, it sort of thought it sparked a thing in me. Where else does it appear? In the branches of the vine. There's somewhere else, but I can't remember where it is now. There's a third place where it appears, but it appears in the dialogue about the feeding of the 5,000, when Jesus says, you don't want the bread that is going to be hungry again tomorrow. You want the bread that lasts. And that's the same word, the bread that abides, that lasts, that endures. It's an ongoing permanence in the word. So I thought there might be something in that. But this whole thing is, I don't know, it's enigmatic, isn't it? What are you looking for? Where are you staying? Come and see. That's an odd. You think the dialogue is odd somehow. Although I do, as both of you have remarked, like this version of the baptism, because it's like the other two are like reporting. Here's the 10 o'clock news. This has happened. We're down by the river. There's something happening. There's a dove. There's some people and crowds and water and as you said, this is John looking back on it. Somebody I think wrote that John's gospel is different to the others. Not that it's written after the events, because the others were, but John appears to make a special effort to add hindsight to the story. So here's the story, but here's our further reflection on it. And this way of writing it offers us that, I think, in John looking back on it, which I must have been aware of, but I don't think I've been closely aware of this version, because I've always read the other two.
No, I know what you mean.
You were going to say something.
Yeah, no, she was just talking about this, that abiding, which I think, thanks, that's really, really useful. But it also it rang bells for me of the Isaiah reading, that wonderful, I think it's verse 5. Yeah, God has become my strength. And one of the questions that I'd asked myself when I was thinking about this was, what does it mean for God to become our strength? And as you were talking, I thought, that's something about abiding in God. And then what does that mean to abide in God? Which I think in our current climate, with everything that is going on nationally and globally and everything, I think that's really central about how God becomes our strength, how we abide in God. So there's a sort of spirituality aspect to this as well, of us and God, and how we manage, how we make ourselves sustainable. Yeah.
Yeah. Rachel.
One of the things that I like about the John reading as well is that, as we've sort of said, it's different from the other accounts. And in the other accounts, you've got them reporting this voice declaring that Jesus is the Son of God. But actually, in John, it's John. John says that sees the Holy Spirit, but it's John's the one who says, "Oh yes, this is the Son of God." And I quite like the way he takes that bit for himself.
I did have an important role to play.
Yes.
Well, I think in John's gospel, John the Baptist is set up almost as a, for want of a better word, I think he's set up as some kind of reliable narrator. And so when John the Baptist says this is him, as a reader, we're supposed to have confidence in that. He's a reliable. Is that what they say in literature? You can have an unreliable narrator. I like those stories.
and a reliable narrator.
It messes with your head when you have an unreliable. You read the story, you think, actually, no, this is an unreliable narrator.
Yes.
John is set up as a reliable narrator.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think, and so when he says this is him, follow him, he's, I think the reader is supposed to have confidence.
That's there, isn't it? Right from verse 6 of chapter 1, isn't it? Where it says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify. And so we're told immediately, this is the person you need to trust here as to what he's going to tell you in this first little bit. Yeah.
I picked up a different angle on these readings, and I don't know how. I don't know. I think Epiphany is sometimes a good place to think about our response to Christmas and Revelation and this message being passed on, and what next? What about what and about calling? And I think there's a kind of a heavy note of calling across these readings, but fairly obviously in Isaiah. Before I was born, while I was in my mother's womb, he made me a secret agent. And this the before I was born thing is like it's reasonably common. I mean, it's there in Psalm 139, isn't it? You knitted me together. I think Jeremiah.
Jeremiah. Yeah.
Jeremiah says, I was called before I was born. I think Paul does in Galatians chapter 1, before he was born. Reckons he was called to this before he was born. That sort of real strong sense of calling. And it kind of spills over in my head. Maybe I'm overthinking it, into the John passage, because what's the state of John the Baptist's calling here when his disciples swan off to Jesus? Maybe that's like the end, the fulfillment of his calling has come to an end. His job is done, a bit like Simeon and Anna. Lord, now let us thou thy servant depart in peace. Well, he doesn't depart in peace. He departs in a violent, bloody death in the palace prisons. But his calling is done. And maybe the disciples there, I was thinking, maybe I'm double overthinking now, but those disciples thought they were called to be John the Baptist's disciples. That was their calling. They were following him. They were committing to him. And now their calling has changed. Oh no, now we're called to this other secret mission. The other one's rubbish. The other secret mission wasn't any good at all. Now we're called to this secret mission. It's kind of vaguely linked, but we've gone off on a completely different path. So I kind of wonder whether there's mileage to talk about with the congregation about how they feel about calling, and how the pathways have changed, and where they feel they are in. Are they done? Some of our congregation might think they're done. Like John the Baptist. Is it okay to say, yeah, you're done, retire, Rachel?
And actually, in Corinthians, in verse 9 of that passage, we're called into the fellowship of his son Jesus Christ our Lord. So there's Paul in verse 1, Paul called to be an apostle. So that emphasis on vocation. I like that we're called into a community of faith. That we're called to commit ourselves to that and to participate within it, because sometimes we do get people who are kind of along for the ride, if you like. Not everybody. And I know some people have reached an age where, or their physical situations mean that they can't do as much as they would like to, but there are still things that you can do. So I'm not saying that, but there are still people who kind of like to be passengers in the church and sort of turn up and not really commit or join in particularly. So
I also was drawn a little bit to this middle bit, and this is the second servant song, isn't it? So there's always a confusion in this passage, whether who's the narrator here. Is it Isaiah? Is it Israel, the whole nation? Is it Jesus? Because it's a servant song. So is this actually is this about Jesus, or is this about Isaiah? And I don't think there's an answer to that. I don't think you can definitively say which it is. It moves and merges between things. I quite like the idea of the whole nation being called, being Israel. We're called as a nation to be a light to the nations. So I quite like that, and it's quite obviously it's used in this sense because it's Jesus. But also I kind of think there must be echoes of Isaiah. Isaiah is not killed off in this. And this bit in the middle, but he's called like this secret agent with the polished arrow hidden in the quiver, and he says, but I failed. Look, we're in exile. I failed in my mission. I'm useless. God, how many ministers have not said that sometime? Or how many church members have not said, yeah, I do feel a calling, but I've failed. I'm useless. And God comes back and says, "No, I'm not having it. I'm not having that." And he doesn't. The interesting thing, I kind of noticed this for the first time. God doesn't come back and say, "Yeah, you have failed a bit. So what I'll do is I'll give you a slightly lesser mission. See if you can succeed at that instead." Because that's what we do, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, you can't do that, so let's do this instead. You can be the chair of the flower committee instead. That might be, you can achieve that. What God does is he kind of trebles the mission. His mission appears to have gathered Israel, the scattered Israel, and then he says, no, you've got a new mission now. Now that you say you failed, it's the entire world. So sort of just like, I think, wow, that's amazing. He doesn't adjust it downwards to account for failure. He adjusts it upwards to say, yes, you can do this. So I don't know. I think I might go with that whole thing about calling and how congregations feel about being called somehow. You were going to say something, Anne?
Yeah, I just think it's really important, the whole thing about the collective calling. I think there's an awful lot in faith talk that is about our individual and me and God. But particularly, I mean, whenever you read the letters in the New Testament, they are about saints in that place, and that you're called to be a part of this community, and the community is called. So I just think it's really, really important, and I think more and more as we become more and more aware of the breadth of our community, that it is not just our neighbours that are next door, and it's not just those who live in the same community or town. Actually, it's our global community as well. And I think there's something really significant about the way that we relate collective to the collective that we are a part of. I think that the whole thing about calling is collective calling. We underplay it quite a lot. In fact, sometimes I think we completely ignore it and we don't like it.
Yeah, we're not just a group of people individually called who meet together,
who happen to come along together.
We do have a common calling. Rachel.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things that as church leaders, I'm sure we try to do, to try and get a church to see what their communal purpose is, and what is our part in God's mission together. Not just, well, what's my part, or what's your part, but who is God calling us to be together. And I like what you were saying, Phil, about the whole kind of confidence thing, because I think if someone is feeling kind of inadequate and whatnot, if you give them a bigger job to do, then suddenly it really gives them a boost, and they kind of grow into that expectation, don't they? If you sort of were to say, oh, well, yes, well, you have really messed this up, so we can't trust you anymore, then it kind of it completely destroys the person. But actually to say, oh, we've got this for you, the bigger thing somehow makes people think, do you know what, maybe there is something, here, maybe I can do this.
Cool. You've really messed up the flowers. Maybe you could be general secretary.
Yeah.
I think it works. I absolutely see that. And I was kind of blown away by this. I failed God. Yeah. Is it too light a thing? It is too light a thing that I've just called you to gather the tribes of Israel. How about this?
Yeah.
How about saving the entire world from your position of exile in Babylon?
Yeah.
There you go. And we think our job's tough. There you go. Isaiah cracks on. But I mean, there's three of him, aren't there? So there's only one of us. There's like these three Isaiahs, aren't there? Maybe I don't know. I'm straying into dangerous scholarship. I think there's more than one Isaiah. I don't know which one this is. I'm sure you two both know.
Second.
I do, but I'm not going to tell you.
You could say any number, Rachel, and I would believe you. I believe you. Yeah.
the third cousin of third Isaiah. Who knows?
Yeah.
Was it at college we were doing charades? This shows how sad we were at college. We were doing charades of the Bible, and one person who was able to do it had just raised one eyebrow, and I can't do that. It's one of the things I really wish I could do. is raise one eyebrow, but I can't. It's
No, I
secret
can't do that
special
either.
skill that only some people have.
Oh, it's a calling.
He kept doing this, and nobody could guess it. In the end, he said it's one Isaiah. So there you are. You could do that for the children's address. You get someone who can raise one eye and say, "What's the reading today?" It's one Isaiah.
I had a teddy bear called Isaiah. Or a friend had a teddy bear called Isaiah because one Isaiah than the other.
One Isaiah than the other.
Yeah.
There you go. Which has moved us neatly on to the moments in the service when we're not dazzling folk with our preaching skills. There's other stuff we could do. So, Rachel, what have you been thinking about? Stuff to accompany your secret mission theme, maybe? Or
well, I did think that we should all have like a card to go home with. That's maybe I don't know, maybe credit card size. That and when you said Mission Impossible, it's made me kind of reframe that, because I'd have on one side your mission, should you choose to accept it, is, and then on the back maybe put the bit from the bit when Jesus is in the temple and talks about the Spirit. I know it's not in our readings today, but about the kind of Jesus manifesto thing. So have some kind of mission card for people to go away with, and something that they can maybe tuck into a wallet or a bag, or stick on their fridge if Neil were here, he'd have a fridge thing.
Yeah, he would.
Something like that. I was also thinking that there's lots of kind of imagery around, bear with it, around Cupid, because you've got you get lots of imagery of hearts with arrows. So I was wondering if there's something that you could play around with in some kind of activity, craft activity, that utilizes that. But I hadn't got very far with that. But I was definitely kind of thinking about having a little card to take away. I was also thinking about the number of times that I think that God should just he should just snap Putin with a heart attack or something serious, and
or an arrow out the quiver. Yep.
So I'm thinking of all the times that I like to think, if only God would, and then maybe get people to think about, what are those situations where you really want to see some kind of decisive act of God, and actually, right, if we're the secret weapons, how might we be used to bring about the kind of change that we want to see? I mean, obviously, I can't go and bump off Putin much as I'd like to. I
was going to say, are you planning some kind of assassination attempt here, Rachel?
But all those times when we're thinking, oh, I wish God would just do this, or I wish God would just sort this out. Well, actually, if we're the secret weapons, how might God be wanting to use us?
I think that's quite a creative question to ask congregations. It's sort of complete this sentence style of thing. If only God would just finish the sentence with your neighbor or whatever, or write it on a board or stick it on a post-it note, and then turn it back on them. I think there's mileage in that. I think you are getting a bit hooked up on this whole arrow and quiver thing, Rachel.
I know. I'll have to leave that aside for next week.
No, but I think when you enable a congregation to grab hold of an idea with a creative mental image, then I think they could really lots of stuff can coalesce around it, and I think maybe you've hit on something that could help people gain a way into these passages, particularly the Isaiah one. So and for people to think of themselves as a secret weapon, God's secret agent in the world to change it and disrupt things. There's TV programs as well, aren't there, where they have like group activities, and one of them is a secret sabotager. Wasn't there a series where one of them was like trying to sabotage the plans of all the others? I think it's appeared in several things where they're supposed to be working together, but one is secretly trying to sabotage the plans of the other.
Yes.
And I've sometimes thought, maybe we could encourage our members to think of themselves as the secret sabotager of empire. of the consumerist culture that we live in. We're the secret saboteurs who go out. A similar kind of idea, except I'm putting it negatively and Rachel's putting it positively, which there we are. There's a difference in our personalities. Yeah. Anne, what have you? I think, Rachel, you could have, like, you should definitely have some kind of Mission Impossible music theme tune
definitely
going
on.
on.
It's been going around my head as well.
While you read Isaiah, you should. And
then maybe a rope ladder dropping down from the roof.
Yes.
This is awesome.
Invite
get an action man on a piece of fishing line. That would be great.
Secret squirrel.
I'm going to now abandon my entire calling thing and go with secret missions. Anne, where were you heading with sort of more
creatively actually? I was playing around with the Corinthians passage, which we haven't talked about much.
Cool.
Which, of course, is starting off Paul talking to the Corinthians, and I always love the way he starts his letters, because he always starts them off. However he's going to however much he's going to have a go at people, he always starts off by saying how wonderful you are and how great is your faith. And it dawned on me, because we're coming up to Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, and one of the things I wondered about was actually writing a letter to other congregations in our local communities to actually say, we give thanks for your faith and for your commitment to this, just to kind of encourage that building up of relationship. So that was one of the things that I was thinking about. And then the other thing I was thinking about was, because it's baptism of Jesus, and John is talking about the impact that it had on him, to actually get those who have witnessed a believer's baptism to talk about the impact that had on them. And also I just wanted to share a good picture. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, of there we go. Can you see that there?
Yeah.
This is the Jesus Maffa, and I just love his image of. I use a lot of his images, but I love this one because I think here the crowd looking on, and the impact of what they are seeing, and the fact that some of them, they're oh gosh, wow, what's going on there? What's this about? Who's being baptized now, and things like that. So I think there's a lot in that picture as well about how people witness things. And I kind of was wondering, I wonder why the people were down at the water that day. Were they there to see John the Baptist? Were they there because they needed to wash? Were they there to get water for cooking? Why were they at the river? And what did they see while they were there? So I think there's quite a lot in that story, in that picture there as well. So that was one of the things I was looking at. Yeah.
I sometimes find myself, when I'm doing baptisms or dedications, usually of babies, looking across the crowd of invited guests, who are often people you don't see in church, not in your church anyway. And I think my experience is, it's not often the parents on the front row who are sort of most engaged with what you're saying. I mean, for them it's a busy, exciting, whatever, there's all sorts of stuff going on in their heads about what this day, and they're worrying about what's happening next, whether there's going to be enough food at the party or whatever. But there's usually a couple of people amongst the invited guests who stand out from everybody. I don't know if this is your experience or not, but as you look, there's usually sort of 2 or 3 who are engaged by what you're saying as witnesses to something. It's not something that's being done for them, but they're watching something, and they're listening to something, and maybe it's they haven't really tiptoed into church before, and you've engaged one of them, and you think, oh, there's somebody who's engaged, but now they're going back off to Colchester or whatever, I don't know, wherever they live, and you think, oh, I hope somebody picks it up. But I think you're dead right. Witnesses to these events are real, and there is something important going on there. Yeah. I didn't come up with that much Swizzy stuff for a change. So, but I was really kind of a bit hooked on the calling thing, and I kind of thought, if I was going to do this seriously with the church, introduce at the beginning of the year an idea of calling, I think I'd want to help a congregation start to think that through seriously, rather than just say on Sunday morning, "What are you called to then?" or "What are we called to as a whole congregation?" And one of the most useful things I've come across to help congregations think about this is a course that you might have come across called the SHAPE course. SHAPE. It's around in different forms. It's one of those annoying things that they've slightly twisted the words in order to make a word shape. So each letter stands for something. I think so. It's like a 5-week course, possibly 6. They might add another one at the end, but possibly a 6-week course. And so the S, I think, is for your skills. Encourage you to look at your actual skill, what you skilled at, and the H, who knows? The A is your aptitudes. I'll come back to. I'll remember H in a minute. P is your passions. E is your experience. And coupled with whatever H is, says there are different ways that we express that we can offer stuff, our skills, our gifts, our passion, what we're really passionate about, and all those things are important, and they're jigsaw pieces into discovering what our calling is, and it's quite a useful tool if you can just not offer it as something that individuals do to discover. Therefore, at the end, you add up all the scores, and this is your calling. But it's a little bit like that, but it helps people reflect on, actually, these are my passions, and I've got this skill, and I've got this experience. That's on my CV, and I've got these aptitudes. This is the kind of person I am. So that uniquely suits me to this kind of ministry. It's a guide, but then if you get like a significant number of people in the church to do it, and you discover that like 70% of your church is sort of geared towards hospitality, then it makes you think about, okay, that's where our passions and skills and aptitudes are as a church. Let's not try to push youth ministry, because there's nobody in our church who feels that as a calling, yet we feel we ought to do it. And it helps, I think, if you can get enough people in the church to do it and share where they've got to, it gives you an idea. Say, okay, let's gear our church to what we have, how people are called here, maybe about how we're as a church. Whereas the minister might come in with all sorts of, this is what we're called to, and the congregation don't share that calling. And then the minister, how many ministers have done this? And you can watch them from afar. And say, I've got this great vision for us as this church here in this town, and nobody else shares the vision and doesn't have the experience. I don't know what H is. I must look it up one day. I don't have the aptitudes, we don't have the skills, we don't have a passion for that. But and then the minister wonders why nobody will do it.
Yes. So I'm intrigued what the H is now.
Yeah, I'll look it up.
You need to share this with the world, Phil.
You can look it up online. I'm sure it appears, but I think it's even free. You can get it
free.
I remember it being quite. I remember, some of them they've expanded out to make a session when really, like you do it in 5 minutes. But even so, I think they come with questionnaires to help you understand. Like those magazine surveys where you answer questions and it gives you a score. Therefore, your church secretary. Therefore, you are treasurer.
Yes, you cannot complain. This is how it is.
But actually, I think what it sometimes does is it throws up skills, gifts, talents, callings that aren't part of our current church structure.
Yes.
Sometimes you think, this is what this church does. Which box do you fit into?
Yes.
None of them. I'd like to start a ministry of this. And you think, great. And that's the way we should be going, I think, is to build our church around the people who have got passions and skills, and you're not constantly pushing people into doing stuff they don't feel called to do. How you translate that into a church service and something, but I don't know. I think I might want to introduce what the SHAP and E are, to get people to think about actually what you're passionate about is important. What are you passionate about? What is it that interests you and excites you? There's a clue. What experiences have you got? Well, I used to do this, and I used to. So all of that adds together to make your shape. Is the quality that makes your shape for mission, or your shape. All those things determine your shape. So there you are. Look it up. It's quite a good thing to do with congregations, I think. That's me out of ideas. Except I did think, is it too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and restore the survivors of Israel? I'm now going to give you the whole world. Reminded me of the yrC and deployment.
Yes.
Moderator rings up. Is it too light? It is too light a thing that you have Sawston, Whittlesford, and Castle Counts. I'm going to give you Stafford Walden and Essex and all stations south. The moderator's not here, so she's in the other room. So
I was going to say, she even says that to you. Wow, there you go.
It is too light a thing, Phil.
Yeah.
You're going to expand your mission.
She says, "Look, I have a whole synod." Yes.
Yeah, so I haven't shown her this passage.
No, I think that's best. I think you should rip that page out of her Bible, just in case.
An email from the moderator that starts, "It is too light a thing."
Yeah, we'll know what happened. She's watched this video. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Right, anything else to say about any of these passages before we ask Anne to pray with us?
Oh, there was one little bit in Isaiah.
Yep.
The sense of being dishonoured, and but those, and I just reflecting on the idea of who is dishonoured in our world that will be honoured because they carry out the dreams of God, and that really struck me with some of the voices that we don't listen to in our world. Countries disproportionately impacted by climate change, and actually perhaps they are actually telling us what the dream of God is, and so there's that. So yeah, that was a kind of a different angle, kind of global awareness angle that that I just made a note of. But yes, but no, I hadn't got anything else. That just struck me.
The other scribbly note I've got on here, which might be rabbit hole, I don't know, but it might help somebody who's still desperate for ideas, even after all these riches that we've just offered. I wrote down at the bottom of my piece of paper here, this whole come and see thing. Jesus says, come and see. And I put the question, what does come and see look like in this church? So if you were said, come and see, what would you be inviting people to? What are you inviting people to look at in the life of the church? Where are we expecting people to see Jesus in our church? Would we invite them to the women's meeting, to morning worship? What? Come and see what?
Yeah.
Is there anything to come and see? Is there any evidence that Jesus is about anywhere to be seen in the life of this church? And if so, what does he look like? It was an interesting but challenging question to ask people. It may not make you popular, but there you go. Okay, it's a challenging thing I'm still exhausted from Christmas to be dragging ourselves through Epiphany, but with the gospel message aflame and our secret mission to fulfill. We're all going to be doing that as preachers, and you're going to be doing that. We want to bless you as you do that, and Anne is going to pray with us as we set about that task.
Yes, let's pray. Gathering God, you call us to you, you call us to each other, you call us to your world. Sometimes it feels overwhelming and sometimes it feels invigorating. So we pray that you will become our strength as we prepare to lead worship this week, that you will become our strength as we serve you beyond our worshipping times together. You will become our strength in all that we do. And so strengthen us now for the call.